Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to the San Francisco Writers Conference podcast, coming to you live from Zoom. Thanks again for joining us. My name is Matthew Félix, and I'm the program director and host of the podcast, which we are in the process of relaunching. And today's episode is essentially the pre-launch, where I'm going to be talking with Laurie, the director, about the conference goings on and the changes and how we've adjusted and are pivoting and all that due to the pandemic. And then we're also going to talk with Lissa Provost about the new writing contest. So the writing contest, even though the conference didn't take place, the writing contest still is, and there's a new, improved, bigger sort of a version. So Lissa's going to tell us all about those changes. Okay, so before we talk with Laurie, I wanted to tell you some of the changes that we're making to the podcast as part of the relaunch. The first episode with an author will be on Friday, March 5th. And the first change is me. And so I figured most of you don't know who I am. And I went to the conference for the first time last year. I had a fantastic experience. That's how I got involved. But I thought I just wanted to tell you a little bit about me, introduce myself. A few months ago, amidst all of the changes that were happening because of the pandemic, the conference board approached me. Like I said, I did go to the conference last year and made lots of connections, met a lot of you and a lot of the board members. And as the pandemic was affecting how things were going to transpire this year, they realized they needed to switch up the podcast a little bit. All of the interviews were taking place at the conference themselves, or the conference itself. And so since this year the conference wasn't going to happen, we needed to do things a little differently. And so they asked me, since I had been editing the podcast episodes from 2020, they'd asked me if I would host starting this year. And I said, sure. I am obviously a podcaster, but first and foremost, like most of you, I'm an author. I have published and written and published 3 books. The first one is a novel called A Voice Beyond Reason, which is about a young Spaniard's awakening to his intuition. The second one is called With Open Arms, Short Stories of Misadventures in Morocco, and that's sort of self-explanatory, a travel collection. And then my most recent book is called Porcelain Travels, and that's actually a humor collection about all of my humorous and harrowing experiences in bathrooms around the world, in, on, and around toilets, tubs, and showers throughout the world. So those are the 3 books that I have out right now. I have another work in progress that's in progress. But I also just wanted to mention lastly that I edit, publish, and market books for other authors as well. Now, it was actually because of my own writing that I got involved in podcasting and interviewing. I was sitting down for my first interview about one of my books in an internet radio station in downtown San Francisco. And in passing, the host of the show just happened to mention that the station was always looking for new shows and for new hosts. And so right then I knew I had found what was going to be my platform, because I was a new author, didn't have a platform, didn't know anybody, nobody knew who I was. So I knew I needed a way to get Matthew Félix, the author, and my books out into the world. I needed a platform, but I hadn't quite figured out what that was going to be yet. So when the woman who was about to interview me said, we're always looking for hosts, I knew right then and there, this is what I'm going to do. 2 weeks later, I had my own live 2-hour internet radio show podcast, and I've been doing podcasting ever since. And that's sort of the trajectory that led me to getting involved in this role with the conference podcast. Now, before I agreed to come on board, there were a few things that I suggested we change, some enhancements that I suggested that we make to the podcast itself. First one was the length. To date, the podcast had averaged about 10 to 20 minutes. And I thought, since we're not doing all of the interviews at the conference, we have a little more time to play with. We have a little more space to work with. And so the episodes are going to be more like an hour going forward. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, to date, the podcast hasn't been on the major podcast platforms. It's only been available on the website. And so in 2021, particularly given that we didn't have the conference this year, and it's even maybe a little more important, the podcast for visibility and for reach and for making sure that we're out there, we're going to put the podcast on the major platforms. So that's iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, all of those major platforms with which you're familiar and probably listen to podcasts. Similarly, we're going to add video. I'm doing all of the interviews on Zoom, not surprisingly. So we have the video. We also have we already have a YouTube channel. The conference already has a YouTube channel, but it doesn't have a lot of content. So this is going to be a perfect opportunity, 1, to repurpose content that we're already going to have through the interviews, and 2, to add content to that YouTube channel that's already out there and ready for more content. Last thing is, we have held a naming contest for a new name for the podcast. Thank you so much to all of you who have submitted names. We got a lot of names. And we're going to talk about the results of that contest at the end of this event. Something I'm not changing, because I think the tenets of the conference really hit it on the head with regards to what's important to us as writers. And what I mean is, what I'm referring to is craft, community, and commerce. And like I said, I just think that really drives home, it really addresses all of our main concerns as writers. Those are the three big things. So as I'm choosing guests, as I'm choosing the topics, and even within the outlines themselves for the conversations that I'm going to have, I'm really trying to keep those three tenets in mind. Speaking of guests, I don't have time to go into detail for everyone that we've got lined up, but I do want to just give you a few sort of examples to give you an idea of the sorts of conversations we're going to be having and some of the authors that I have already lined up. First and foremost, or not first and foremost, but first of all, I guess I should say, I don't want to put her on a pedestal, even though I love her relative to the other authors, but the first episode, the first interview that I've already done is with Alia Volz. And she wrote a book called Home Baked, which came out last year. The paperback is coming out in April. And it's about her experience. It's an autobiography and memoir about her experiences growing up in San Francisco in the 70s and 80s, when her parents were selling cannabis brownies. Her mom in particular was going out into the city and selling cannabis brownies. So that in and of itself is an interesting story. But because the story takes place in the 70s and 80s, there's so much history. So it's really so much more even than about just her own experiences. It's about the AIDS movement, when AIDS, took off in the 80s. It's about cannabis, the whole history of cannabis and legalization. It's about some really big political and social things that were happening in that period. So I loved the book. So that's the book. But the reason I asked Alia to be on the show, and the reason I'm positioning her as the first episode, is because she launched during the pandemic. I launched 3 books for clients during the pandemic. And so I also know firsthand how difficult, like Laurie does, and like so many of you do, how difficult it's been dealing with some of these challenges, even though, as Laurie just got done talking about, there have been some really great silver linings to the pandemic, but the actual launching has been trickier. Well, Alia not only had a successful launch, but she taught a workshop on launching during the pandemic. So I thought, given that, yes, we're starting to come out of the tunnel, thank God, and the vaccinations are happening, but I still feel like this is really relevant because we're not quite out of the tunnel yet. And even once we are, I think there are lessons to be learned from how we launched during the pandemic that we can carry forward. So really excited about that episode. I loved the book. I love talking with Alia. I just mentioned that I'm focusing, when I choose my subjects and the people I'm speaking with for the episodes, I'm focusing on the 3 tenets of the conference. So one of the episodes is going to be focused specifically on community. And I'm really excited about this one. So Laurie Doyle, who's a conference alumnus, a teacher, she's a member of the San Francisco Writers Grotto. She's also a co-founder, along with Ryan Sloan and Maury Zeff, of the Babylon Salon reading series, which if you haven't attended, you should. I've been following them for about 2 years. They always have amazing writers. It's a great event. So she's going to be on, in addition to Ryan, who is on the faculty of UC Berkeley's college writing programs, and like I said, also a co-founder of Babylon Salon. So what we're going to talk about there is, I figure between the 2 of them, we've got academia, writing groups, and literary events, which are 3 of the principal ways that we as writers find community. So we're going to talk about those 3 things. And then we're also going to talk about our own personal experiences. When I was writing my novel, I mostly did it in a silo, like so many of us do, even though I did make some efforts to find community. It wasn't until I found the Book Passage Travel Writers Conference that I ended up finally finding some community, and doors started to open, and one thing's led to another. So it was kind of through that I ended up at the San Francisco Writers Conference indirectly. So I think that'll be a really good episode, particularly for newer writers who are trying to figure out ways to find community, but even for those of us who are already established somewhat, because it's always good to get new ideas, right? And learn about new ways to make connections. Another episode I'm really excited about is with Joanna Penn. So she's an author, and I sort of think of her as a self-publishing, indie publishing goddess, right? She's in the UK. She's a best-selling author in her own right, many times over. And when I was getting started, I self-published my first book. When I was getting started, her website, her podcast, those were some of the major or principal places that I went for information. I love her personality. She's so knowledgeable, and I really wanted to get her on the show. And so I was so excited when she said yes. I don't know if I already said that she's in the UK. So there'll be a little bit of time difference. If I have bags under my eyes, it's because of the hour. But like I said, really excited that she's going to be on the show. so many more people I want to mention, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to mention one more. And this is Natalie Bazile, author of Queen Sugar. And I hope I'm saying her name right. Laurie, am I saying her name right? Is it Bazile or Bazile?
Bazile.
Bazile. All right. Because I kept
Yes.
meaning to research that before today and I kept forgetting. So anyway, Natalie Bazile, author of Queen Sugar, which many of you probably know, Oprah turned into a TV show that just got renewed for seasons 5 and 6. Big success. Well, she has a new book coming out in April called We Are Each Other's Harvest, Celebrating African-American Farmers, Land, and Legacy. It's an anthology. So we're going to talk about that book, but we're also, from a craft perspective, we're going to talk about the craft of putting together an anthology, which to me is a really interesting process. How do you choose? How do you organize? How do you make it all flow and come up with your overall vision, bringing together all these disparate parts? So we're going to talk about that process. And then, of course, how could I not ask her about what it's like to have Oprah call you and say that she wants to turn your book into a TV series? So she's probably so sick of getting that question. And I even told her that when I reached out to her, I said, you might not want to talk about this anymore, but so many of us, I mean, I'm sure there's just so many lessons. And even if we're just living vicariously through her, I think that'll be a really interesting conversation. And she seems up for taking that question. So, like I said, a lot more guests, a lot more going on with the podcast, but hopefully that just gives you kind of a sense for some of the guests and some of the topics that I'm going to have on, or we're going to have on. Once more, I'll just reiterate also, if you have questions about the podcast, about the changes, about some of the other guests, feel free to ask, and we can address some of that in the Q&A at the end of today. So that's me. That's the podcast. I want to turn now to the real star of the show, Conference Director Laurie McLean. Yes, own it. Just own it. And so let me introduce Laurie. I mean, most of you know Laurie in some capacity, of course, at least if you've already attended the conference. But let me just tell you a little bit more about her. Laurie spent 20 years as the CEO of a publicity agency and 8 years as an agent and senior agent at Larson Pomala Literary Agents in San Francisco. Following her stint as the CEO of a successful Silicon Valley public relations agency bearing her name, Laurie switched gears in 2002 to immerse herself in writing. She earned a bachelor's degree in journalism from the State University of New York and a master's degree from Syracuse University's prestigious Newhouse School of Journalism. Laurie has been writing professionally since high school, first as a journalist, then as a public relations agent, then as a novelist. And she penned 3 manuscripts before realizing that the life of a literary agent was her destiny. So we're going to talk about that. In addition to being the director of the San Francisco Writers Conference, Laurie co-founded 2 publishing companies with her client partners. One is Joyride Books for vintage out-of-print romance books with Linda Wisdom, and the other is Ambush Books for out-of-print classic tween and teen books with Douglas Rees. Welcome, Laurie.
Man, I gotta shorten that resume. It sounds like I'm a nut job here.
It does. Well, you definitely sound a little like a nut job, but a really interesting nut job. So just own it. No, you know what? I think everyone always gets a little self-conscious, but I think it's really interesting to know, what are people's backgrounds and how did you get to where you are today? So thank you for letting me just steal that from your website without you knowing. But I like that quote though, that you said, the life of a literary agent was your destiny. So can you tell us kind of how you came to that realization and what you like about being an agent?
Well, it's kind of, the grass is greener on the other side thing, where all the time that I was in sales and marketing and very analytical, I kept saying, oh, I miss the creative side of my brain. I miss being able to have time to write and be creative. And instead, I'm only marketing creative people. And then I decided, well, that's it. I'm going to be creative. So then I was creative and started writing books. Then I missed the sales part of my brain. So finally, I had the aha moment that I really have 2 parts of my brain that are happiest when they're working together. So being in a creative industry and being the analytical sales person, the planning person, was just perfect for me.
Right.
So yeah, in fact, it was the San Francisco Writers Conference that brought this out, because I finished my novel. It was a romance novel for my mom's 80th birthday. I had no desire to publish this and didn't know anything about publishing. I just wrote it for her. But of course, your mother was, oh, you need to get this published. And the San Francisco Writers Conference was the next weekend. So I went to it and got Elizabeth Pomada as my agent. I'm like, well, now I'm in deep. What do I do? And so coming off the 20 plus year stint in business, I wanted to, be close to her and find out what she was doing for me as an agent, because I had no idea what agents did. And then so I'd go in there once a week, and finally she said, well, would you like to do something for the conference? And they didn't have a writing contest. So I said, sure, I'll do a project. I'll create that for you. Did way too much research, did the contest. And then also, I think it was 3 months into it, they took me out to lunch and I said, I really like this agenting thing. And they both laughed and said, well, it took you long enough to come to that realization. We realized that the first week you were working with us. So then I became an agent for them for 8 years until I'm really a serial entrepreneur at heart. So of course I had to then form my own agency with a partner.
So, I mean, we could have a whole conversation about that, about being an agent and about what you've learned from that.
Please
But
don't.
we're not going to right now, but there is one thing I want to ask, just because, and this, just like what I was saying with Natalie, this is a question you've already gotten 1,000 times, but I thought, since we're talking about this just briefly, could you tell us, so many of us are getting ready to query, present company included, and we're always wanting to hear from agents, what's some advice about how to query? And of course, there's lots of information online, but based on your experience, what are just 1 or 2 tidbits briefly that you would share for authors getting ready to start querying?
Okay. So first thing is, do your homework. Spend 10% of the time that you spent writing your book to look for your future business partner, because that's really all an agent is. I know we all have this sexy allure about us, and you really want to get us, so everybody is sycophantic and wanting to have an agent. And in a lot of cases, you do need an agent, but there are also cases where you don't. But since you only asked me about agenting, in your query, try and keep the same voice that you have in your writing. So if your writing is very factual and didactic and dry, that's how you want your query to sound. If your voice is very fanciful, and I don't mean like the voice that I'm speaking right now, not this literal voice. I'm thinking about the you that's, as the author, that's behind the words that you're writing. So don't make the query in, say, hi, I'm, Ishmael, and here's my story about a whale. You don't want to have it in your character's voice. It's more your voice as an author. And I know that's really hard to get to, but just kind of think about that. And then I go back to Michael Larson, the founder of the conference. I go to his advice: the hook, the book, and the cook. 1 paragraph of the query letter, the first one, is the hook, the log line in Hollywood, the very, very short, Moby Dick in space, whatever it is, very short. And then the book is, you expand on that promise. So you've hooked the editor or the agent's attention, you expand on it for a paragraph, and then the last paragraph is the cook, which is you as an author. Don't say, I'm a mother of 3 children and I live in Nova Scotia, because unless your book is set in Nova Scotia in a family environment. Right. If you don't have anything to say, you're a debut author, then you say, I'm a debut author. This is my first book. Right. And that's all.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you for that. So I'm going to ask you about the conference very shortly. There's just one more thing I want to ask to sort of transition to that. You just told us how you got involved in the conference. You went as a participant. How did you transition to director? How long have you been director? And kind of just tell us a little bit about how that happened.
Gosh, well, we skipped this year, as you all know, and we're saying that it was our gap year, and we took it off to reevaluate and refresh ourselves between high school and college. So when I got involved with Larson Pomada, it's kind of impossible to be involved with them and not be involved in the conference, at least back in the day. And so for the first 50, well, I wasn't in the first one. So for the years 2 through 16, 15, I was doing the writing contest. I was in charge of I was the agent and editor liaison. I did a bunch of different jobs, kind of, Matthew, like you're getting sucked into the whole vortex now through podcasting. If you really enjoy being part of the conference, I could imagine there will be more duties that you might want to assume as we move forward. I'm just warning you.
Let me make a note of that.
Make a note of that. You might want to back out now. But anyway, so I did a variety of those things. The other thing is I love working with Melissa's here, Elizabeth is here, Tara is here. I love working with the people behind the scenes at the conference. They're just some of the greatest people ever. So it's really fun. And when something's fun, it doesn't feel like work. So I became the director. Gosh, Lissa, when did I become the director? I guess 2 years ago. 2 years ago, because for the first, it was the 2 years that we transitioned from being at the Mark Hopkins, where we'd been for, over a decade, and into the, did I say Mark Hopkins? Yeah, Mark Hopkins,
Yep.
into the Hyatt Regency San Francisco, which is down in the Embarcadero. So that was actually a huge transformation of the conference, where we had to jettison some things that wouldn't work in that space and add a whole bunch more things that would work. So for 2 years I did that, and then we get hit with the pandemic, and I just kept saying, like, why, universe, why did you, we finally get over the hump of this big transition and you throw a pandemic in my face. So so this year was very different, but I would imagine that next year is going to be similar to what we would normally, what we're familiar with,
Fingers
and then
crossed.
but even
Yeah.
better.
Yeah. Even better. So how did you, I think one thing a lot of us probably were curious about is, obviously up until the last minute, we were wondering, is this going to be able to happen? And then I think a lot of us, at least I was wondering, well, will it go virtual? So I'm just curious, can you tell us a little bit about the decision, why you decided to do the gap year and not try to pull it
Yeah.
off in a virtual format?
Yes. Well, we did last September, we pivoted with Writing for Change, and we made it totally virtual, and that made sense because Writing for Change should be a global conference and it should be affordable. And I got to tell you, I mean, San Francisco is a very expensive city, and the bulk of the money that we bring in through registrations goes to pay the hotel for the rooms, for the food, for the audiovisual equipment, everything like that. I mean, basically, that's what gets eaten up in our budget. So with Writing for Change, we found that we could do this much more economically. We could actually pay people who are speakers, which, what a concept.
Mhm.
However, it was with a conference like the San Francisco Writers Conference, something that big with so many moving parts, we really felt like the personal experience was worth the money. Whereas with a virtual conference, it's just not the same. It's like you guys right now listening to me on Zoom. Oh, I'm sure I'm very fascinating and all that. And you're
So fascinating.
enthralled by everything I'm saying. But it going to the conference and having those meetings where you come around the corner and see somebody, an agent that you've been stalking online for 6 months, getting ready to meet them, and you have a conversation, or meeting a potential beta reader or critique partner, or going to something that you had no interest in and finding out, wow, I could write nonfiction. I thought I was a novelist, but I could do this. This is really interesting to me. Those serendipitous moments were they were so integral into the conference. We just didn't feel like we could replicate them online. So that's why we really decided to take a year off and come back full force in 2022.
Right.
And the
Thank you for
hotel
that.
was nice enough to let us not pay for this year and take all our deposits and apply them to 2024. So we'll
That's
be
amazing.
at the Hyatt in 2022, 2023, and 2024.
That's
At
fantastic.
least, if
Yeah.
not longer.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
fantastic because I mean, we hear in the news so much about, rents not getting reduced in restaurants and bookstores and so many people struggling to keep paying these costs. So it's fantastic that the Hyatt actually let us defer all of that. That's amazing. So great.
Yeah.
You just mentioned the Writing for Change Worldwide Conference, and I was going to ask you about why that worked online versus why the normal conference didn't. So thanks for addressing that. So safe to assume there's going to be another one this year. And then also, I think that that's sponsored by the San Francisco Writers Foundation. Can you just give us a little tidbit about what that is?
It's part of the San Francisco Writers Conference. I think when Michael and Elizabeth first formed the conference, it was a tactical error, but they named the whole nonprofit organization the San Francisco Writers Conference. That implies an event, that implies a one-time thing, at least once per year. So every other thing we were doing had to be under that nonprofit banner. So we created the foundation because there's a lot of good work that the conference does, but nobody knows about it because they just think it's an event.
Mhm.
So Writing for Change, for example, is under the San Francisco Writers Foundation, which is also under the San Francisco Writers Conference. If you actually looked at our nonprofit organizational structure, but we've got all kinds of other things. We have classes that we hold with the Mechanics Institute
And
that are
so
free
if I can just
or
interject,
cheap.
yeah.
Sure.
So now I think I just want to clarify. I think we're now going to go into some of the things that are actually taking place this year, right? So for example, there's
Oh,
those classes.
okay.
Let's talk about the 2021 because I think some of those classes you just mentioned are happening this year.
Yes. Well, when we decided we weren't going to have the conference, and try and replicate a 4-day in-person event to transition it to become a 4-day online event with a lot of the same things, it was just so much of a technological challenge that we couldn't do it. Whereas having Zoom classes with Mechanics Institute, and they have the audio visual guys, and they have Taryn Edwards, who's the I don't know what her title is actually, but she's the one in charge of all the podcasts and all the classes and things like that. That was a lot easier because we knew Zoom really well, whereas Writing for Change was on Crowdcast, which has a great stage audience metaphor, but it also is a little trickier for people who are used to Zoom. So we were doing these classes in person. It was an easy pivot to do them online. And let me just talk briefly about the 3 that we're having coming up, because I think they're really cool. The first one's actually a 2-part class. It's called Stories from the Pandemic, and it's going to actually be archived, and it will be part of the record at Mechanics Institute. It's being taught by Kate Farrell, who has a really cool storytelling book out called Story Power. It takes place on Saturday, February 27th and Saturday, March 6th. And it's, if you're a Mechanics Institute member, you pay $49. If you're not, it's $59. And all of this information is on the classes button, under the classes button at sfwriters.org, which is our San Francisco Writers Conference website. The next one is Frederick Schott. I'm sorry. One of the problems of publishing is not knowing how to pronounce someone's name because you only see it in writing. But that's on Friday, the 12th of March. It's free, and it's called The Making of My Heart Sutra. It's about a book that he wrote, but it's very much about spiritual writing. So if anybody's interested in that, that would probably be very interesting. Let me see if I have info on that one. Yeah, that is, he's going to be interviewed by publisher Peter Goodman of Stonebridge Press, and the 2 of them have been working together for decades. So they have a really easy style and much camaraderie. And it's, his book is called My Heart Sutra: A World in 260 Characters. So that should be very interesting. And then the third one is me. I am giving a class on March 27th from 10 to 11 called New Year, New Day in Publishing. And kind of what I said in the intro hit on a few of those points, but it's amazing how month to month things are changing so rapidly in publishing that I have to majorly revise my presentation. So that one is free. And then the last one is in May. So that's kind of looking way out, but save Saturday, May 8th. That's Cheryl Bizboute. I'm probably totally destroying her name. I'm sorry, Cheryl. And Joan Gelfand. And it's from storyboard to narrative. And they're going to walk you through the whole process from 12 to 1:30. That one is, if you're a Mechanics Institute member, it's $15. And if you're not, it's $25. So again, we're trying to get free and inexpensive ways for you to keep honing your craft and learning about it this year. And then just real quickly, Matthew, we're going to do some fun things too that were part of the conference, but we took them out. First one is in March. Andy Jones is going to do his pub quiz, which if you have ever come to the conference, it's really fun. We're going to reach out, Jordan, wherever you are, we're going to reach out to the different California Writers Clubs groups and see if they want to form their own team. And then we'll have team against team competition, and Andy will be the MC asking the questions. And then in April, Lissa's going to do an open mic and poetry day or a couple hours or whatever on Zoom. And maybe she can talk a little bit more about that. And then in May, I'm going to organize an agent pitch-a-thon because we all want to pitch our work to agents, right? So you got until May to get that together. And then again in September, we'll have Writing for Change Worldwide.
So can you tell just a little bit more for those of us who haven't necessarily attended a pub quiz? You said teams. Is it just sort of like what we would expect if we actually went to a pub and it's just sort of a trivia night, or is it more focused on writing? Can you tell us a little bit more for those who haven't attended a pub quiz, what that is about?
Well, I'm going to pivot right over to Lissa Provost and have her talk
Okay.
about it because she's the one who organized it with Andy.
Okay, nice transition. Lissa, you're on. Can you tell us about the pub quiz? And then I think Laurie also said that you're organizing the poetry mic. Is that open mic? Is that true? Maybe you can
Yes,
talk about both of those.
we're
Okay,
still working out the details of those. It is like a pub quiz that you would go to out at a bar,
great.
where you have a team. You can put together your own team, or we'll connect you with a team, um, and it'll be hosted over Zoom. Um, we haven't got the date yet, so we're
Okay,
working towards that.
great.
We're
But that's
thinking
sometime in March, it sounds like.
sometime in March,
Okay.
probably towards the end of March.
All right. And then the poetry open mic.
Same thing, we're working out the details of that. But there's been a lot of poetry events, but they have all sort of dropped off the open mic part because it's kind of hard to organize. So we're gonna push to do that part as the emphasis of our event. Normally we have the poetry and jazz at the conference, and it's absolutely fantastic. People bring their best stuff. April is poetry month, so we expect
Uh-huh.
people to have some nice new material.
Perfect. So I just happened to see a question that we're taking questions at the end, but since this is an easy one and it's specific to what you just, something you just mentioned, Judy Salamancha is asking how many in a team for the pub quiz?
I think it's flexible between like 6 and 8 you
Okay.
want to have on the team.
Great. The other thing that you are responsible for is the new writing contest. Even though the conference didn't take place this year, the writing contest is, and not only is it taking place, but it sounds as if it's getting sort of even bigger and better. So now might be a great time for you if you want to share some of those details.
Yeah, we wanted to make some changes. We made a lot of changes moving to the Hyatt, and so we kind of put some other things that we wanted to change aside for a couple of years, and now we're focusing on them. Um, the contest. Um, we have the contest, we see the winners, we list them in the program, but we don't see what they wrote. We come to the conference, we say, hey, here's the winners, but nobody can read what they wrote except for the judges, and some fantastic entries come in. So we decided this year to do an anthology of the 10 finalists from each category. The categories are adult fiction, adult nonfiction, children's YA, and poetry. So there will be 10 finalists from each category. The first place of each category will get a $100 prize. The first place chosen between all 4 categories will get a grand prize of conference registration. So in the past, it's been like $250 prize. This year, it's a full conference registration. And
Margaret's
then
going to win again, probably.
Wait, what did you say, Laurie? Who's going to win again?
Margaret Rodenberg, who is down here, she won the fiction category twice, maybe even, I don't know if you won the grand prize, but yeah, twice. So she's amazing. So watch out, everybody.
Okay.
You really have to bring your A game against Margaret if she enters.
Good to know. Everyone be on the lookout for Margaret. Okay, Lissa, you were saying?
I was saying. So, and then we reduced the price from $35 down to $30. And then everybody who enters, whether you win, whether you're finalist, or whether you don't win anything at all, you will still get a free copy of the anthology that we print with all of the finalist entries in it. So you can see what you were up against. And, I think it really helps you to improve your craft when you sort of get a sense of what's out there. The limit for submissions is 1,500 words. So that could be like 1,500 words of your novel. We would prefer the first 1,500 words of your novel, which if you're a finalist, then it gets published in the anthology, and then that's an advertisement for the rest of your book, right? You can have up to 3 poems in your entry if the total word count is less than 1,500 words. And then we've changed the whole schedule. So the entries are by September 18th. And then we will have the finalists announced by October 1st. And then the top winner by November 1st. And the anthology will be out by December 1st in time to get it for Christmas if you wanted to order extra copies. And also so that our grand prize winner has some time to make their travel arrangements to come to the conference. So we really want to see them there. In the past, we've had many grand prize winners who couldn't come to the conference or didn't come to the conference. And it's great to announce them there when they're actually there.
Accepting, what do they do at the Academy Awards or whatever, accepting from
In absentia.
on scene in wherever they're filming. So two things I just want to clarify. One is, I think you said this, that it's the contest is open to any writer, right? Regardless
Any writer.
right, any writer, first of all. And then I don't know if you said this or not, but is there, I know you said we'll be able to hopefully buy the anthology in time for the holidays.
Yes.
Will that have national distribution? Will it be just available on the website? How will people be, or maybe you don't know yet, maybe I'm jumping the gun.
It'll have it'll be print on demand distribution. So one of the great things about the San Francisco Writers Conference is that it has embraced the whole movement with self-publishing and alternative publishing channels. And we have some great sponsors, Lulu and Ingram Spark and Smashwords and Draft to Digital and all of these. And so we're going to actually use some of these resources to publish the anthology. And so it'll be a great way for you to also see, as a writer, how do their books look when they come out? Where can I find them? What does it look like when I go on the website and look up this anthology on Amazon that was printed through this other company, that was a writers conference sponsor. So it's actually a great opportunity to use it as sort of a test as a writer. What does this look like?
Great. One quick question I happened to see on the chat, which again, this is from Kyle Lund. I'm sorry, what was the deadline for submissions? Could you repeat that again, please?
Deadline is September 18th, 2021.
Okay. And then James Sweeney asks, can you enter more than once if you have several draft novels?
You can enter as many times as you like, but there's a registration fee for every entry.
Okay, and thank you, Elizabeth. I see that you answered that one. Issues with
and
scrolling.
you'll get a copy of the anthology for every entry.
Oh, and then Laurie answered it. So one thing you will not be able to say about this event is that you did not get answers. You got multiple answers to every question. Oh, but then Laurie answered it wrong.
Yeah, I answered it wrong. So
let's
didn't know
focus.
How to erase that. So
I know that's the problem with chat. There is no erasing. So basically, I think the message here is we want to listen to Lissa and not Laurie, at least related to the contest.
I'm good with that.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Lissa. I don't think, again, we'll take questions in a few minutes. So if there are any additional questions that come to mind between now and the next few minutes, feel free to shoot them our way again in Zoom. Hopefully Laurie won't answer and Lissa will. Okay. So let's talk, Laurie, going back to you, Laurie, just briefly, and I don't know if there's much more to add along these lines, because I think you've kind of touched on it, but just thinking ahead to 2022. So you said late 2021, we will be doing again this fall, the Worldwide for Change. Wait, is that the right name? Change for Writing for Change Worldwide. Right. So that'll be happening in the fall. And then we're looking ahead to February 2022. That's so far out. But can you speak to, when we'll know for sure, and when do you actually start planning for next year? Just a little bit along those lines.
So the pandemic really threw a monkey wrench into everything. By now, we already would have had we would be close to having our post-conference meeting where we talk about what worked, what didn't work, what things do we need to change, what ideas did people have at the conference that we can institute for next year, all of that. But we figured this was we're still too much in the grips of the pandemic, and we don't know. Our big problem is, will people feel comfortable gathering in large spaces with large groups of people by February of next year? God forbid we get a resurgence in the fall and we have to go virtual anyway. But we figured, look, let's just plow ahead. So in June, the whole planning committee is getting together, hopefully in real life. And we will be talking about everything that, last year was the best conference, or 2020 was the best conference we'd ever had. Most number of people, most positive responses to everything we did. We felt that we utilized the space well. The pricing was good. Working with the hotel staff was smooth, we figured. And maybe this is why we had a pandemic. We're like, okay, let's just rinse and repeat. This thing is dialed in. And then the pandemic hit like the next week. So hubris, try and avoid it. So next year, it will be very much like 2020, except there are going to be some things we do differently. Obviously, the content's going to be different and the speakers will be somewhat different. We try and keep 25% at least the same from year to year, because there are some local people who are just amazing and we want them every year if they want to come. We'll have different keynoters, but we'll probably do the same thing where we have keynotes at lunch. We'll still have a program for kids, local kids, but none of this has been fleshed out yet. So the structure, the bones of it will remain the same, but the flesh and the hair will be different. How about that for a visual?
That was amazing. That was an amazing visual. And so again, the planning will start in June. And then you did say something though, interesting at the very beginning. You said about maybe having to go virtual. So in a worst case scenario, even though we didn't want to do that this year, you would consider that for 2022, which hopefully we won't have to.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. You know, I really do feel that the personal, being there in person allows us to have the conference that is always rated, you know, in the top 3 in the United States. I mean, I look at Writer's Digest, their annual conference in New York, and I say, you know, they did it virtually. It just wasn't as good. I don't want to tarnish our image by doing something half-baked. However, I can't see us going 2 years without a San Francisco Writers Conference.
Right.
So we'll do it. We'll pivot. And in June, when we decide what we're going to do, and we reach out to our keynoters and we reach out to the speakers and we start getting the agents on board and we start updating our website, we will have a warning up there saying, you know, if the pandemic throws us another curveball, we still plan to have it, but we'll probably have to adjust the pricing and give people partial refunds. I was amazed that we had almost 20 people pre-register for the year that wasn't. And most of them just said, oh, just apply that to what you're doing in 2022, which was actually wonderful. Cause you could imagine, I mean, just pulling the kimono open a little bit is all of us took massive, massive pay cuts to, you know, I think I'm working for 5 cents an hour now. But we all believe in this conference so passionately that, you know, we didn't have a choice. We were going to make it happen moving forward. I'm just glad that the hotel allowed us to append it to our current contract rather than killing us this month.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I just
nobody
want to
would
say
have come.
Yeah. And I just want to say that given the limited amount of time that we've worked together so far, it seems to me that you deserve each of those 5 cents per hour that you're getting. I mean, your contribution is absolutely worth each of those 5 cents. Okay, so we're getting to the end of today's session. There's one more thing that I want to touch on. And then, like I said, we've kind of been able to insert the questions as we've gone along, but if you have any additional questions, now would be the time to present them via Zoom. But I just wanted to circle back to something we talked about at the beginning, another contest, and that's the podcast naming contest. We were initially going to announce, we were initially going to announce the results of the contest today, and then a decision was made, you know, some of you might not have known about the contest, and so we wanted to give those of you attending today the opportunity to submit your suggestions. So we've extended the contest by 1 week. So the new deadline is this Friday, February 26th. If you have podcast name ideas, go to sfwriters.org. That's where you can not only find out information about what's, you know, current goings on, but if you scroll down midway down the page, there's a place you just click and there's a form where you can submit any podcast name ideas that you might have. So please do that.
And Matthew, tell them what they would win.
That is exactly what I'm about to tell them. So they have basically three variations on $195. So the variations on that are 1 day free admission to the 1 day poetry summit, free admission to the 1 day book to screen summit, or if you're already registering for the conference, those are both included. So the $195 will just get applied to your registration. So like I said, any way you slice or dice it, it's a $195 value. So, and you got a week. So those of you who have not yet submitted to the contest, get your thinking caps on, show us how creative you are, especially now that I've talked about kind of the vision and what, you know, the new, the relaunch podcast and kind of what that entails. Hopefully that will help as well. And we will announce the contest.
Can I just say that Callie Gilbert has joined us today, and she is in charge of the Book to Screen Summit. And Lissa, who's right next to me up here at the top, is in charge of the Poetry Summit. So if you have questions about those specific things, here is your chance to ask the two people who are the superstars.
The superstars. And speaking of superstars, thank you, Elizabeth. Elizabeth has just included in the chat window, she's included the link to the naming contest. So thanks for that. All right. So like I said, now, if there's any additional questions, that covers all that we were hoping to cover today. If there aren't any additional questions, then we'll just say thank you very much, unless Laurie or Lissa or anyone else has something to add. Yes.
I have one thing to add.
Yes.
And that's that I believe that the San Francisco Writers Conference is as much about inspiration as it is about education. And yes, you're going to learn a lot there, but it's really going to supercharge your writing. So I'm very sorry and sad that we didn't have it this year, because I know that a lot of people really start their year off by coming to the conference, and it's like getting into the jet stream with your writing, and people are very productive afterwards. So join a writing group, get your critique partner dusted off and settled, but really use 2021 as a time to innovate in your writing and really double down. And I know a lot of you couldn't write in 2020. I found it very hard to be creative last year, but this year's a whole new game. And I just hope that you will all take the chance to substitute something else for the conference this year. I see Callie has her hand up.
Callie, superstar Callie would like to say something. So Callie, go for it.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that what Laurie just said. For those of you who don't know me on this call, I first attended in 2012 as a volunteer, and then helped in various ways throughout the years, published my first books, was invited to speak. And now I'm leading the film, book to screen track. So you never know where life will lead you. I published my 10th bestseller in November of last year. So 2020 was pretty amazing. So yes, I invite everyone to come and learn and extend to this beautiful family that I love.
I tell you, it's like a vortex. It just sucks you in.
It's true. And I mean, you already mentioned this, Laurie, but I'm a perfect example of that because, 2020 was the first time I went to the conference. And I also, like Callie, I did it as a volunteer. And that's something we actually didn't talk about today. But I absolutely love volunteering. I mean, that's why I ended up in this role, actually, through the connections made volunteering. And I was just so impressed with the conference, and I just had such a good time. I met so many people. I did actually went to the book to screen, right? Yes. Book to screen summit last year. I loved that. I went to all of those sessions. And so volunteering it's a great way also to get your foot in the door. And like you said, Laurie, a couple times you end up getting sucked into the vortex, and here I am in the vortex. And so far I'm enjoying spinning round and round. I'm enjoying the vortex. But yeah, volunteering is a great way to get involved.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Any other thoughts, feelings, questions? I'm looking just to make sure I'm not missing any hands raised or any comments that came in while we were talking. But I think
here's something I'll throw out there, Matthew. It isn't really a question, but my email address is director@sfwriters.org. And if anybody thinks of questions that they have after this conference, or if you're looking at this podcast later after February, feel free to email me and give me suggestions, complain, praise us, whatever you want to do. I'm on email all the time, so I will be very responsive to you. I feel like we're a big family, and I know that's kind of a dumb thing to say from a business point of view, but the San Francisco Writers Conference and the Foundation and Writing for Change and just all the people involved are so wonderful that stay connected to us, even if you don't come to the conference every year. We have a YouTube channel. We have a Facebook page. We're on Twitter, but not as much, probably. I'd say the Facebook page, you get more interaction with presenters and with attendees. But, every once in a while, give us a shout out and stay connected.
Okay, and Peter Dudley, I have asked you to unmute, so you should be able to unmute yourself now because Peter has a question or a comment.
No, actually, I was just giving a thumbs up.
Oh, it was a thumbs up. Okay, I saw the hand. I didn't see the thumb. So, okay, thanks for the thumbs up. And thank you also to Renee Anderson for the 5 stars. We'll take them. Thank you for that. Okay, in that case, unless Laurie, any last minute thoughts, feelings?
No, just, my heart goes out to everyone. Like I said, I know that it was a crappy year last year, but, through all the darkness comes the light. And I really think 2021 and beyond is going to be amazing. And I hope you all have incredible creative projects that you can dive into and keep yourself nourished that way. I got to lose 5 pounds in the physical world, but I hope I gain that in the creative world. Callie, did you have something you wanted to say?
She does. There you go.
Yeah, I was just going to say, is there a way of getting a group shot of everyone here?
No, I'm not that I know of. If somebody does, we can, because the thing is we have so many attendees. I think they're spread over 2 windows. I mean, someone could take 2 screenshots, I guess. I'm a Mac user currently on Windows. I'm not sure how to do screenshots on Windows anymore. But while someone is figuring that out, thank you very much. Jordan is touching her heart and raising her hand. Oh, you got the screenshots. Okay, we're doing charades now. We're doing charades. Thank you very much, Jordan, for that. The last thing I want to say, 2 things I want to say. First thing, thank you again, Elizabeth. Elizabeth has just posted, and this is a great thing to point out. In the chat window, you'll see the link to our Facebook community group. And so please join that if you haven't already. So thanks again for the reminder, Elizabeth. And then there was something else I was going to say, and I completely blanked. So I think I'm just going to say, thank you very much for joining us. This is what I was going to say. The other thing is, we know we've all been on so many Zoom calls the past year. So the fact that you would join us today on a Saturday, no less, we really, really appreciate you being here today. So thank you very much for that. And we look forward to being in touch through all the things that Laurie just got done, all the different ways that things are still happening in 2021. And we look forward to seeing you there. So thanks again for attending today. We really appreciate it.